Hey everyone, this is Christian C, and this module will serve as an introduction to the ego self. The truth is that everyone has an ego from the time that they were a seed in their mother's womb. A person develops their ego so that they can survive in the world. From when they're babies, they must rely on the ego so that they may be able to cry when they're cold or hungry. From here, a complexity of emotions, feelings, and characteristics develop, but what is truly coming into fruition is the ego self. The ego self is not necessarily the vanity, capriciousness, egotistical side, but rather a force that also drives, protects, nourishes, and helps survive. Just like the higher self helps us survive, the ego self has the same goal in mind, but through a different energy process. It's a different approach of the instinctual energy within us that is utilized for us to survive as humans, be able to relate to others, and be able to replicate. Your ego wants you to be better, it wants you to shine, and it wants to be in the spotlight. If having a healthy ego is actually helping you achieve a goal, such as losing weight, looking better, then go for it. Keep utilizing it at the forefront. But be well aware that if we lead with our ego, that could later cause problems and it could really take us for a dive with our energy. In other words, know how to work your ego instead of letting your ego work you like a puppet. And I would say that in the long-term journey, a healthy balance of your ego self and higher self is necessary. Your ego can help you change for the better with the right light, yet it doesn't mean you should use your ego with any negative connotations towards yourself or others. As humans, I think we can all develop a moral compass that is good enough in knowing when we're demeaning ourselves or others, for the most part. So what I'm trying to say is that we more or less have a good moral compass in which we use to know and feel when we're being fair to ourselves or others. Now, this doesn't happen with everyone, but for the most part, we are capable of having somewhat of a good judgment on reality. And establishing a good moral compass is something we develop, and we're always looking to make progress with it as well. Being able to calibrate situations and interactions is something we will naturally develop with the energy of duality. So in other words, if you use this program and you use the law of duality, this will incline you to get better at developing calibration and knowing how to judge certain situations. Overall, most of us have a good sense of morality and decency, and we must not allow it to become cloudy through our ego being unbound and our ego becoming a loose cannon that we cannot keep in check. So, how do we go about this? Having a healthy ego self also means having a good balance with your higher self. When both have the right balance and feed off each other, that's ultimately when ascension happens. When we have the right balance in both sides of duality, the ego and the higher self feed off each other. We might know someone that has a big ego, but to that person, they don't see themselves that way. The way that they interpret life is that they need to survive and thrive in order to win. So for the most part, people with big egos don't necessarily have a good way to calibrate their energy, or if they do, they're utilizing their ego and putting it on the forefront in order to win. They might be competitive, or they might just not want other people to win. So they're leading with their ego self to get what they want. And This might be because the more they push forward with their ego self, ultimately, that is what is going to create the transformation they seek. Why do they think this way? Perhaps because since they were young, they led primarily with their ego self and they got rewarded. So now they continue to create an action reward loop that works for them. Ultimately, they believe that this is the best way to operate with others and themselves. And let's be clear about this. Speaking about working on your ego self is not because you have a big ego or you are being egotistical, as it's often misinterpreted. People often believe that when you're working on your ego, it might be that you're just working on your dark, jealous side. But rather, working on your ego means finding the right balance of being bright and vicious, being alive. There's so many positive connotations towards the ego self, and it's not necessarily something that should be shunned upon or something that shouldn't be talked about. The ego self is the fighter, the go-getter, the defender, the strength, the sun. We sync the ego self with the higher self, which is also the protector. So how can this be? The ego self is the protector in a fighting stance sort of way, while the higher self is more of the protector through a healing approach. The two sides of this energy of duality work hand in hand in creating your journey. We will later expand upon identifying and working with the ego self. But for now, let's move on to the next module, Introduction to the Higher Self.